Yes. Incredible. It's different. It's special. You can tell that
Hollywood is not what you think it is. That's what Jim Carrey said. And he didn't say it in a movie. He said it with a dead stare on national television while the world laughed uncomfortably. He wasn't joking. In the middle of a late-night interview, Carrey suddenly flashed the all-seeing eye hand sign, a gesture long linked to secret societies. The crowd chuckled, but Jim didn't. His tone dropped. "You know what this is," he said. "They're controlling everything." The host froze. The producers cut to commercial. That was just the beginning. Over the next few years, Jim Carrey, once the highest-paid comedian in the world, walked away from Hollywood. Not for a break, not for rehab, but because, according to him, he saw something he could never unsee. He called fame a trap. He said Hollywood was run by dark forces. In one speech, he even claimed we're all just characters in a game controlled by people behind the curtain. At first, people called him eccentric, then paranoid, then unwell. But what if he was right? Because the more you dig into what Jim Carrey actually said in cryptic interviews, spiritual rants, and behind-the-scenes moments, the more one terrifying theory emerges. He tried to expose a secret club that controls the industry, a system no one dares talk about. And maybe he paid the price. What happened to Jim Carrey wasn't just a transformation, it was a warning. But the truth behind it is much darker. Before the fame, before the masks, before the $20 million paychecks, Jim Carrey was just a boy watching his world collapse. He was born in Newmarket, Ontario. His father, Percy, was a jazz saxophonist who gave up his dream for a job as an accountant. His mother, Kathleen, battled chronic illness and depression. Their home was unstable, but what happened when Jim was just 12 shattered everything. His father lost his job. Overnight, the Carreys went from barely surviving to sleeping in a van, a cold metal box parked outside a factory, where young Jim worked nights as a janitor to help feed his family. Scrubbing toilets at 14, wearing worn-out shoes, hiding the shame every morning before school. This wasn't a humble beginning. It was humiliation, and it left scars. Jim didn't just develop comedy as a gift, he used it as a weapon, a shield against the darkness. In school, he was the class clown, because laughter was the only power he had. At home, he'd stand in front of a mirror for hours, morphing his face into grotesque shapes, practicing voices, disappearing into characters, not for fun, but to escape. Because reality, his reality, was too cruel to stay in. And deep inside, something began to grow. Not just talent, but a fracture, a silent belief that none of this is real, that life itself might be a joke, and the only way to survive it is to play a better character. This wasn't just the birth of a performer. It was the creation of a man who would one day question the very nature of existence. Hollywood didn't know what hit it. When Jim Carrey arrived in Los Angeles in the late 72nd, he was broke, unknown, and living out of a beat-up Toyota. He had one thing, a belief so unshakable it bordered on delusion. In fact, he once wrote himself a $10 million check for acting services rendered, dated it 5 years into the future, and carried it in his wallet every day. At night, he performed stand-up in dingy clubs, contorting his body, electrifying crowds, and scaring executives. He was too much, too intense, too weird. One casting agent said, "He's not an actor, he's a force of nature." It took years. But then, in 1990, came In Living Color, and everything changed. Jim didn't just appear on screen, he detonated. Sketch after sketch went viral before viral even existed. By 1994, he unleashed a triple hit that no one had ever seen before. Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber, all in 1 year. He was Hollywood's golden weapon. Studios threw millions at him. Audiences couldn't get enough. But behind the exaggerated faces, something wasn't right. While the world laughed, Jim stayed up nights, staring at the ceiling. He questioned everything: fame, identity, purpose, and he began to see the machine, the handlers, the manipulation, the whispers behind closed doors. Success gave him access, and that access showed him a version of Hollywood few ever glimpsed. He once said, "I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of, so they can see that it's not the answer. Jim Carrey had everything. But it was during his rise that the illusion began to crack. The higher he rose, the more he saw, and what he saw disturbed him. By the early 2000s, Jim Carrey was untouchable. He'd conquered comedy, crossed into drama with The Truman Show and Man on the Moon, and proved he wasn't just a clown, he was an artist. But behind the camera, Jim was unraveling. He became obsessed with identity, not fame, not money, identity itself. After playing Andy Kaufman, a man who blurred reality and performance, Jim began to question if he had ever been real at all. He said, "There's no me, there's just this character called Jim Carrey that I play." He wasn't being metaphorical. He went silent for years, stopped chasing roles, disappeared from red carpets, and when he returned, he was different, bearded, detached. Speaking in riddles about consciousness, control, and the false gods of Hollywood. Then came the interviews. At Fashion Week, he stared into the camera and said, "There's no meaning to any of this." On red carpets, he mocked celebrity worship. On talk shows, he hinted at a system run by invisible hands, pulling every string, and always, there were symbols. Hand gestures, pyramids, eye signs. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. He was trying to say something, or warn someone. The backlash was instant. Media called him crazy. Former colleagues distanced themselves, studios stopped calling, and then, in 2015, the final blow, the woman he loved was found dead. Suicide, prescription drugs. A scandal followed, lawsuits, blame, and a media storm that painted Jim as unstable, toxic, dangerous. He withdrew completely. No press, no films, just haunting interviews and cryptic paintings, many of which featured political leaders, Hollywood elites, and occult symbols in disturbing form. His art became his voice, and it screamed betrayal, manipulation, and control. Jim Carrey didn't just walk away from Hollywood. It was as if he was excommunicated for seeing too much and saying what no one else dared to. Jim Carrey didn't crash in a car. He didn't overdose in a hotel room. But what happened to him was, in many ways, more disturbing. He disappeared, in plain sight. After the death of Catriona White, his on-again, off-again girlfriend, Jim retreated from everything. The tabloids feasted on her suicide note. The lawsuits accused him of supplying the pills. Anonymous sources painted him as manipulative. The headlines didn't just attack his name, they erased his humanity. But Jim didn't fight back. Instead, he turned to silence, and then to art. His paintings were grotesque, symbolic, angry, clowns with dead eyes, politicians with twisted mouths, skulls behind smiles. Viewers dismissed them as celebrity vanity projects, but those who looked closer saw a message. He was screaming, and no one was listening. Then came his final roles, not in movies, but in interviews that felt more like confessions. He said things like, "I don't exist. There's no me. It's all a lie." He wasn't promoting a film. He was breaking character. He was trying to wake us up. And yet, the world turned away. Hollywood no longer knew what to do with him. The industry he once ruled now treated him like a liability. The same directors who once fought to cast him now stopped returning his calls. He became inconvenient. Not for scandal, but for truth. Because when a man who's seen behind the curtain starts naming what he saw, the game ends. And Jim Carrey knew too much. He didn't play by the rules. He mocked the players. And he didn't care about the prize anymore. This wasn't the tragic fall of a comedian. It was the erasure of a whistleblower. Not with violence, but with silence. Jim Carrey no longer lives in the Hollywood spotlight. He lives in the quiet, in nature, among canvases, colors, and questions. He paints, he meditates, he disappears for months, over East. And when he speaks, it's no longer to entertain. It's to warn. He's not remembered for the jokes anymore. Not for The Mask or Liar Liar or Bruce Almighty, but for the moment he looked directly into a camera and said, "You're not in control. None of this is real. In this not. In the eminences." Some dismissed him as broken. Others saw a prophet hiding behind the ruins of a career. But those who listened closely, who paid attention to the symbols, the tone, the silence, they heard something else. A man who escaped the machine, who once touched the very center of fame, fortune, and illusion, and chose to walk away. His legacy isn't just a filmography. It's a warning that behind the glitz, the awards, the glamour, there is a system, a club that no one dares to talk about. And Jim Carrey, for a brief moment, pulled back the curtain and said, "Look." Most of us blinked. Maybe we'll never know what he truly saw. Maybe we're not meant to. But if Jim Carrey was right, if even half of what he hinted is true, then we should stop laughing and start listening. Because sometimes, the man acting like a fool is the only one telling the truth.